Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Gini Dietrich.
And Ginny, I want to talk about our compensation today because I think it's about time we started paying ourselves.
I agree. Boom. Do it.
Right after this. So today we're going to talk about owner compensation at agencies because this is something that I think a lot of owners struggle with getting correct for all sorts of reasons. First of all, I think they don't think about it correctly and how they should be compensating themselves. They don't think about all of the tools that they have to compensate themselves, and they don't use the right numbers for compensation. So we can explore this from a lot of different angles, but I think fundamentally, if you're going to be running a successful agency, you need to be taking the kind of compensation that makes you happy to be doing it, but you also need to be taking the compensation that fairly represents the work that you're doing, right, so that you know whether the business is performing well or not. Because too often I go into an agency and I look at their books and they tell me, oh yeah, we've got a 40% profit margin. We're just killing it. And then I find out they're not paying themselves.
They're not paying themselves.
I'm like,
so you don't
actually
have a 40% profit margin.
Correct. And so so then when it comes time for them to think about exiting the business in some fashion, that makes it more complicated because anyone who would potentially buy the business, for example, is going to come up with a salary for them and say, this is what you should have been paying yourself. Yep. And your profit margin is not 40%, it's now 15% or whatever it is.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think one of the other things that, especially as I was starting my business, that I struggled with, and sometimes I still struggle with this a little bit, is I definitely pay myself enough. But the end of the year stuff. So you're getting and it's technically not even the end of the year. It's usually March, April, but you're getting ready to pay your taxes and go through all that. And it's the money that's left over. What do you do with that? You've already paid taxes on it. What's left? What do you invest back into the business? What can you take as the owner? Like all of that stuff that nobody really teaches you. And you typically don't have somebody to say, okay, we're going to plan for this. You're going to make your quarterly tax payments. And when whatever's left over after you've done everything, you can take that home.
Yeah, and I think part of it is you have to have this mindset that you're being paid for two things as an agency owner. You're being paid for the risk that you're taking as an entrepreneur, and that's the profits of the business. And so you get paid a dividend or whatever you want to call it for that. But then you also need to be compensated for the actual work that you're doing, whether that's the work of managing the business, servicing clients, doing business development, all those kinds of things. So you need to really be thinking about the fact that you have two income streams coming from the business. And if you're not thinking about those two and thinking about them differently, that's where a lot of the problems arise.
Yeah. And I think it's really important. That's really great advice. And I also think it's really important to have somebody who's a professional help you plan that out. So that, in the early days of my business, the accountant would call, on April 14th and say, you owe $150,000. And I'd be like, I what?
Right.
I don't have $150,000. So it took some time from my perspective to say, okay, you have to help me actually plan this out. I can't write a $150,000 check tomorrow, ever, never. Right. So help me plan this out. So I think, to your point, taking a salary that pays you for the job that you're doing and then understanding what profit you can take out of the business after you've paid your taxes and everything, that will be your draw, your distribution, or your bonus.
Right. And I think it is important to talk with a professional, both so that you can plan so you don't get stuck with a tax bill that is a surprise, but also because you want to make sure that you're doing things from a tax advantaged standpoint as much as possible, but still looking at it in fundamental business terms. So, for example, your tax accountant may tell you to do certain things to minimize your tax burden, but that's not necessarily what you should be looking at as far as what your total compensation is.
Right.
So your tax accountant may tell you, don't pay yourself as a W-2 because the way your business is structured, the state you're in, whatever, it may not be advantageous to do so. If that's the case, you still need to, on paper, know that a portion of this is the compensation for your work and a portion of it is the actual profits from the business that you're taking. So don't get confused here by tax accounting versus business accounting. You need to focus primarily on the business accounting portion. Let your tax accountant help you lawfully evade taxes as best as possible.
Yes.
Lawfully,
Lawfully,
lawfully.
yes, lawfully, yes. But yes, I agree with that. Um, and I think it's really important also for you to have a W-2 and be paying yourself something. How you do that is up to you. It could be that you're paying into 401k and you're paying into taxes and you're doing all that and you're not actually taking a quote unquote paycheck, like you're not getting money into your bank account. Because then if something were to happen and you have to take short or long-term disability, you have proof that you've been paying yourself, and now you'll get 60% of that, or whatever the disability policy is. You'll get a percentage of that W-2 that you've been paying yourself, versus just taking a distribution where that's not counted in your short or long-term disability.
Yeah, and as one of the things you need to be thinking about as you are thinking about how much compensation you're taking, you think about how you're taking it.
Yes.
And some of these benefits could be in the form of insurance policies.
Yep.
Right? It is not uncommon for agency owners, for example, to have the business own a life insurance policy on them. Depending on your own health and age and all that kind of stuff, that could be a very valuable benefit to you and to your family if the business is able to pay for it as opposed to you paying for it personally. So that's something that you should be considering, and it is part of that total package of compensation. Disability is absolutely another one of those, and because you're a business owner, you need to make sure that the policy is covering you appropriately, because there are different ways of treating disability insurance, where in some cases you may need that W-2, in some cases you may have a policy that has a set amount regardless. There's a lot of different approaches that you can take, but you need to make sure that you have something tailored to your situation. So in addition to talking to a tax accountant or a financial planner, you need to talk to someone who understands insurance benefits for entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And helps you to get those correct. And things like health insurance are another thing that you should look at potentially as part of your compensation from the business, because you can, as a business owner, potentially, although it's a lot more complicated in the US than it used to be, but you potentially can structure things so that you have some pretty good health insurance benefits for yourself. And that is valuable and something that you shouldn't overlook.
And the other thing I would add to that is 401k. If it's an IRA,
Absolutely,
or if it's a traditional 401k, like we were going through the tax process this year, and my accountant called and said, "Hey, you can actually put another 25k into 401k." And I was like, "Do it right now! Like it's tax free." Yes, do that, because now I'm investing in my future as well, and then that's another $25,000 I don't have to pay taxes on. So yes, please do that. So there are lots of ways that, to your point, that you can compensate yourself. I am of the mind that I like to have the money in my account for sure. But there are ways you can do this to protect yourself and the business so that you are covered from all angles, from an insurance perspective, a salary perspective, a bonus perspective, a 401k perspective. You're covering yourself to be able to run the business effectively. And when you go to sell or leave the business eventually, there's something there that potential buyers could go, "Oh, okay, so the CEO was making X amount, that's an actual appropriate amount, and they were doing this, this, and this, that's appropriate." And they can look at the business overall and the health of the business based on that, versus based on, I was just taking money out if there was anything left at the end of the month.
Right, which unfortunately is how a lot of small agencies get run. It really is just,
That's how I did
it's
it.
sort of
Yeah.
it's sort of checkbook accounting. Oh, there's money in the bank.
Yep.
I'll sweep it into my pocket.
Yep.
And the problem with that is, not just if you're thinking about selling somewhere down the road. And I know a lot of owners will say, well, I'm not thinking about selling, or it's so far away, it doesn't matter. It's more about how it helps you to run the business today. And so if you're not paying yourself a fixed amount each month, as whether that's as a W-2 or just a fixed check that comes out of your account, however you do it, then you're not necessarily operating your business in such a way that you can meet that obligation. And it then is distorting what you think your profits are. And so if you're only sweeping money off the table, which are effectively profits, you are contributing your time for free to the business.
Yep.
And then that's where the owner gets into trouble, where they say, well, I really want to hire someone to do this so I can focus more on business development, or I can get myself out of these daily calls or whatever, but I can't figure out how to do it because I don't have the money. You don't, because you didn't price it effectively, because you never compensated yourself for your actual work. You only ever took profits. And so you turned into a volunteer for your own business, which is nuts.
Yeah. And this goes to a different conversation, I think, but to your point, I have many clients who will say, "Oh, that doesn't really matter. I'll do that work for that client because I don't bill my time."
Yeah.
What do
Oh,
you
I hear that one all the time. It's
What do
so
you mean?
painful.
What do you mean you don't bill your time? If you worked for an agency, would you bill your time? Yes. If you worked for a corporation, would you get a paycheck? Yes. Okay.
But here's the problem, and here's where I think it comes from. It comes from the fact that most small agencies evolved from someone being a freelancer. And when you're a freelancer and you are 100% of the labor of the business and you don't really have other expenses other than your own time, it is difficult to imagine, okay, I'm being paid for, for the time I'm spending as a freelancer and I'm getting some kind of profit on top of that. And so it does get blurry. The problem is, as soon as you hire your first contractor or your first employee, you need to completely break out of that.
Right.
And unfortunately, most owners don't, because most owners, when they're adding that additional resource, it's because they're drinking out of a fire hose and they don't take time to pause and think about how they're setting it up. And so then just inertia carries them forward. And I mean, inertia is one of the most dangerous things for any business, but particularly for agencies. You need to be really intentional about the decisions that you're making if you want to be successful.
Yeah, and just because you own the business does not mean you should be giving your time away for free. Ever. No. Do not do that, because you said it, you're now a volunteer for your business. You're not, clients aren't paying for your time or your expertise, which is why they hired you. You're not getting paid for your time and expertise. So now how are you making your mortgage and your car payment and kids' tuition? Like all of the stuff. You can't do that if you're giving your time away for free.
Right. And owners will argue with me, well, I'm not volunteering because I'm taking a big fat amount of checks home each year. Well, you are, but that's purely off of profits. Imagine if you were actually paying yourself for your time, how much more you would be taking home. Imagine how much flexibility you would have to do different things in the business and invest in some of the things that would help you to scale up and relieve some of the burden that you have. If you're not actually paying yourself for the work that you're doing, you will never, ever be able to do that. And you will constantly underprice your services, which is, a huge problem, because if you underprice your services, you have a team typically that is unhappy because you're asking them to do more in order to balance the books on their backs.
And that is the perfect example, because when I have this conversation with clients, they say, well, I can't really pay myself because I can't afford to have so-and-so and so-and-so. And I'm like, that's because you're not priced correctly. Stop doing your $2,500 a month minimum that gets you like 2 hours of people's time. That's a slight exaggeration, but and actually price it correctly. How much does it cost you to have this person on board? What is the cost of running the business? What kind of profit margin do you want? That's how you price. Now you can afford to pay yourself and have your employees or contractors paid as well.
Yeah, I really wish more owners would take that to heart. I really wish they would understand that you need to price based on what your actual expenses are. And too often they get so wound up in, well, my competitor is charging this, or I heard that the client had paid this to an agency before, or this is what my old agency used to charge. None of those things matter. Or
my favorite, the client will never pay that. Oh, okay. How do you know?
Right. Well, yeah, the negotiating with yourself is unbelievable in the agency space. Even large agencies do this to some degree, where they will just start negotiating with themselves before they even have a conversation with the client about numbers. Stop. Yeah. And you've got to figure out what your costs are. And a key portion of that cost for any small agency, in fact, the most expensive cost on an hourly basis, should be your time. And when you're thinking about how you calculate your compensation, first and foremost, you need to make sure that your compensation for the work you're doing, not the profit piece, just the work you're doing, needs to be substantially more than your highest paid employee.
Yes.
Substantially more.
Yes.
If you feel like, if you are paying anyone who works for you more than you are making, or it's even a close call, there's something wrong. That's not what you should be doing.
No.
And when the business hits a bump in the road, you lose a client or something like that, your first thought should not be, well, I'll cut my own salary. I'll pause my own pay. You need to say, my resources are not aligned correctly, and I probably need to let someone go.
Yes.
Painful, but subsidizing them by cutting your own pay is very short-sighted. And it may get you through the next few months, but it's first of all, it's going to make you miserable. And
It makes you
to be
miserable.
successful as an owner,
Yes.
you have to be happy.
Yes.
Not, not that kind of happy, but just you need to be satisfied with what you're being compensated. And if you're not paying yourself, you're not going to be satisfied, or you shouldn't be.
No, you're right. I made that mistake. I made that mistake during the Great Recession. I was like, I didn't want to lay out. I had to lay off half my team, but I didn't want to have to lay off more than what I did. And so I cut my pay. I didn't pay myself. That was that year and a half was the most miserable year and a half ever. Like it's shocking to me that I continued doing what I do because it was so miserable.
Yep.
It's miserable. Like, you can't go to work every day and not be compensated for the work that you're doing. You just can't. Nobody does. Right. Your employees wouldn't do that. Contractors wouldn't do that. Why do we do that to ourselves?
Yeah, honestly, it makes no sense whatsoever. And I think that it is, if you're looking for how to take your agency to the next level, if you're looking for how you can scale, if you're looking for how you can improve your own satisfaction, it really comes down to how much you're compensating yourself for your work, for your profits, how you're doing it. There's a ton of different ways that you can compensate yourself, and not Absolutely. All of them are cash, right? Part of it is the flexibility. You need to factor in if you only want to work 30 hours a week, that's fine. That's part of your compensation, is that you are only having to work the number of hours that you want to work, and so you can provide some value to that on paper. Doesn't mean that you should work for free for your business, but it is worth something that you have flexibility like that. So if you're looking for ideas on the different ways that you can compensate it, it's an article that I've written recently. You can find it on the SAGA website, and you can kind of go through and look at all of these different things. And I probably overlooked a few things, because it's amazing how much flexibility that you have if you're willing to take advantage of it, and you're willing to talk to the professionals who can help you identify where these opportunities lie. Because sometimes if you just move an expense over to the business side of the equation, you can still be completely legit and legal, but you can be providing yourself a tax benefit in the process. And so why not do that if you can?
Pay into your 401k as much as you possibly can.
Yeah. And I think most owners understand the retirement piece. They may not be doing it, but they understand that it's there. But I think it's all of these other pieces of the puzzle that you want to be thinking about. But fundamentally, however you figure out this package, you need to make sure that you are properly being compensated for the work that you were doing. And I think if you take nothing else away from this episode, that's what you need to focus on, because far too often you're just paying yourselves out of the profits, and it's not really profits at that point. That means you are not running a profitable business in all likelihood if you are not paying yourself these two different income streams.
I will say this directly to some of my clients, and you know who you are when you hear this. $36,000 a year is not a living wage.
I would go even further. If you're in the United States and you're an agency owner and you're paying yourself less than six figures, there's something wrong.
There's something wrong.
You almost certainly could go out and get a job somewhere else for at least that much.
At least.
And if you're not going to be compensated for the risk and the stress that you're taking on, why are you doing it?
Why are you doing it? That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Why are you doing it?
And by the way, that's your compensation. You should still be getting your 20% profits on top of that.
Yes, you should.
So focus on your own compensation. If you're not doing these things, it means there's something else wrong in the business. It means that you're not resourced correctly. Maybe you've got too much staff. Maybe you're not priced correctly. Maybe something else is wrong in the business if you are not able to pay yourself properly as a worker and still take home profits.
So let's link to that article in the show notes so that people have it. And I recommend everybody listening to this, and anybody who's not listening to this, who needs to listen to it, read that article to figure out where you can start to diversify your income as a business owner.
And for God's sake, just start paying yourself regularly. Please. We're begging you.
Please.
Meanwhile, we'll continue doing this show without any compensation.
I get compensated. You don't get compensated? No.
Well, we got to have a little chat after the show about that and figure out where that check is coming from.
Thanks, Ben.
On that note, I'm Chip Griffin.
I'm Ginny Dietrich.
And it depends.